Grounds. Good morning. I am Councilmember Rafael Salamanca. I'm the chair of the Committee on Land Use. We're here today to discuss the proposed legislation of 1572A, a bill sponsored by Public Advocate Jumaane Williams that would require an analysis of racial and ethnic disparities for land use applications of significance. The analysis would identify existing conditions and trends in neighborhood, racial and ethnic composition, social and economic indicators, and disparities in data between racial and ethnic groups, among other provisions. In 2021, New York remains a divided and inequitable city with persistent disparities between Black and Latino families and white families. Numbers and statistics can't fully express the crushing reality of this inequality, but here are just a few citywide figures. The income of the median white household in New York City is more than double than that of Black or Latino households. For example, $94,000 for white households versus $48,000 for Blacks and $44,000 for Latinos. And this is before the impacts of COVID-19, which has impacted the health and economic well-being of Black and Latinos. While 60% of white New Yorkers have at least a bachelor's degree, only 19% of Latino and 25% of Black New Yorkers do. Life expectancy in communities of color across the Bronx and central Brooklyn is 5 to 10 years lower than in affluent parts of Manhattan and Queens. And according to a Brookings Institution study, the New York City metropolitan area remains the second most highly segregated region in the nation, second only to Milwaukee. Much of this inequality is due to the legacy of decades of explicitly discriminatory housing and land use practices, from redlining to urban renewal to exclusionary convenience. These practices systematically exclude generations of New Yorkers of color from access to fair housing and economic opportunity. While the Housing Fair Act of 1968 ended the worst of these practices, they were then followed by decades of implicitly biased policies that continue to facilitate exclusion from wealthy areas of opportunities and concentrate new affordable housing production in lower income communities of color. The legislation proposed today will not solve New York's racial equity crisis on its own, but by ensuring analysis of potential disparities is included from the very beginning of a proposal, this bill can help begin to institutionalize the goal of a racial equity in our land use decision-making process and provide stakeholders the needed information to push for more equitable outcomes.
My name is Jumaane Williams, Public Advocate for the City of New York. The way in which land is rezoned in our city has subsequently made it difficult for many New Yorkers to find a home, let alone to stay in their homes. The land zoning process, coupled with the use of the mandatory inclusionary housing program as it is currently drafted, has led to massive gentrification, exclusion, and displacement across this city because its process does not take into account the potential effects that proposed land use actions could have on the racial makeup of a neighborhood.
My name is Anita Laremont, and I am the Executive Director of the Department of City Planning. We're wholly committed to advancing fair housing in New York City, ending the legacy of discrimination and ongoing discrimination, and advancing and addressing the inequities that plague our city.
My name is Alex Fennell. I'm the Senior Housing Organizer at the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, ANHD. This legislation is a significant step towards equity and planning that our communities have been calling for decades. Throughout the dramatic changes made under the Bloomberg and de Blasio administrations, low-income communities of color were repeatedly targeted for rezonings that resulted in the racialized displacement of residents and significant losses of industrial jobs and small businesses.
On the heels of our community-led victory over the failed Industry City rezoning application, we must look critically at and amend the land use review processes that have allowed countless private developers, such as Jamestown Properties, to harass, displace, and undermine community planning and leadership, and use outdated development models that do not allow us to utilize the few and invaluable industrial sectors to build for our climate, future, and economic resilience.
My name is Alessandra Amatrano. I'm here as a representative of the Committee to Protect Chinatown and the Lower East Side, as well as Artists Against Displacement. We, as both organizations, stand in strong support of this bill.
There being no other members of the public who wish to testify and propose 1572A, this hearing is now closed.
I'm Mark Levine, City Council member, Chair of the City Council Health Committee, and I'm thrilled that I am co-chairing this hearing today with Councilmember Carlina Rivera, Chair of the Hospitals Committee, and really want to thank her for her outstanding leadership throughout this entire crisis. We're holding this hearing jointly today on the topic of the distribution and accessibility of the COVID-19 vaccine in New York City. Vaccination is the single biggest, most complicated, and highest stakes implementation challenge of this pandemic for our city. To reach herd immunity by the middle of this year, to have hope of any return to normalcy this summer, we need to be vaccinating upwards of 400,000 New Yorkers each week. Last week, we vaccinated 1/4 of that number.
And I have to ask the question that every New Yorker is asking. We all knew for at least 8 months that a vaccine was coming. We knew that millions of people had to be vaccinated. Why are we just now figuring out where and how to administer it?
I'm Dr. Dave Choksi, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. As of now, there are 2 COVID-19 vaccines authorized for emergency use by the FDA, manufactured by Pfizer/BioNTech and Moderna. Extensive clinical studies have shown these vaccines to be safe and highly effective. There is currently a limited supply of vaccines, and to ensure the available vaccine is allocated in the most equitable manner, it is being prioritized for administration to certain groups.
How many doses are we getting from the federal government each week currently?
Well, I would start by saying that the amount changes week to week, and often we are not made aware of that allotment until a few days prior to receiving the doses for the week. In some weeks, we've received upwards of 200,000 doses. In other weeks, including this one, we've received about 100,000 doses.
How many New Yorkers are currently eligible for vaccination?
Between phase 1A and phase 1B, we estimate it's about 2 million New Yorkers.
Can we not get door-to-door service for seniors who are homebound? And can we not find a way to avoid any circumstance where a senior has to wait in line for 2 hours because of the risk of COVID spread and other challenges?
There are some real limitations with respect to the stability of the COVID-19 vaccine, because these are mRNA vaccines. So it's not as simple as, for example, even having a refrigerated backpack, putting some vaccine doses in it, and just going door to door to vaccinate our homebound elders. Unfortunately, that is not workable as of today.
Do you need to go to the same provider to get your first and second shot?
Yes, the default pathway for any New Yorker who's getting their first dose is to go back to the same place either 3 or 4 weeks later to get their second dose.
Well, what is the refusal rate right now? And I'm using refusal. Well, let's not say refusal. What is the acceptance rate right now of eligible? Let's just take our city hospitals, of our eligible individuals that could get it versus those who have actually taken at least the first shot.
In New York City Health and Hospitals, our best guess based on conversations with our staff is that about 30% are currently vaccine hesitant.
I am disappointed in the fact that this city allowed so much death in Black and Brown communities in the onset of COVID, and I am even more upset that now we have vaccine and we are not prioritizing those who are dying at the highest rate in the city of New York.
So the vaccine is free, but who pays for the administration cost?
The most important thing is that you're right. The vaccine is free for the person receiving the vaccine. If that person has health insurance, then the health insurance may be charged for that type of administration fee that you describe. And the federal government has stated that it will ensure that the vaccine is delivered free of charge to anyone who wants it. If someone is uninsured, that is not a barrier. They can still receive a free vaccine, and that includes undocumented New Yorkers as well.
There's controversy around those with type 1 diabetes being included. What about cancer survivors? And just to go a little further, I was contacted by someone who is living with HIV and has numerous allergies. She was told to wait because of that, but also that the vaccine should be administered and done in a supervised clinical hospital setting, just in case she goes into anaphylactic shock. So when will we expand to those with underlying conditions and those who need to seek medical treatment? And what is the plan for those who will need specific circumstances met?
We do not yet have a precise timeline from the state with respect to when people with underlying health conditions would be prioritized.
For those who do take the vaccine, do hospitals and healthcare providers have a plan for administering those second doses, right? This has been incredibly challenging for a number of reasons.
For that question, that is a very important point, and indeed is part of our standard operating procedure. When an individual comes for their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, in fact, they are given their second dose appointment at that same time. In addition, we have a tracker to be able to follow up to make sure that folks do return for their second vaccine, and if they miss that appointment, we will be reaching out to those individuals.
This hearing is concluded. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Today, the Committee on Transportation convened remotely to hold this important hearing on illegal parking and bike lanes. We will also be hearing intro number 2159, a bill in relation to hazardous obstructions by vehicles and civilian complaints to the DOT for hazardous obstruction violations. The bill will create a penalty for hazardous obstructions by a vehicle and require DOT to create a civilian reporting program for such violations. In 2014, the de Blasio administration instituted Vision Zero, a citywide initiative to improve the safety of all its streets. Everyone knows that this policy is following a worldwide initiative dedicated to save life. As part of an effort to combat preventable traffic violence, the initiative has included expanding enforcement against reckless and dangerous drivers, implementing new street designs and configurations, enhancing public outreach and communication, and implementing a number of pieces of legislation to increase penalties for dangerous drivers. Parking enforcement is the sole responsibility of the NYPD, and they are responsible for actually administering parking tickets. Without enforcement, parking regulations alone will not address the problem.
My name is Axel Carrion, Vice President for State Government and Public Affairs at UPS. As UPS looks to expand its cargo bike operations in New York City, in coordination with New York City DOT's e-cargo bike pilot, we appreciate the city's efforts to expand the bike network and reduce conflicts between cyclists and vehicles.
My name is Paul Schreiber. I am here to speak in support of the bill. I would like to make two additional points here. One is there are a couple of ways to improve the bill. The fine of $175 is too low to start, and it should increase with subsequent fines. And secondly, the restriction on being within 1,320 feet, which I looked up and is 1 mile, unnecessarily limiting and should be expanded to protect all bike lanes everywhere.
The 88th precinct has decided that the laws of the city of New York do not apply to them. They have painted parking spaces onto the sidewalk of Classen Avenue. These parking spaces are labeled XO, Patrol Lieutenant, ICO Sergeant, etc. Indeed, the ICO Sergeant is the Integrity Control Officer. That is the person who is responsible for the placards, and yet every day they are parking on the sidewalk. These spaces are clearly in violation of both the city charter and the Americans with Disabilities Act. I've personally witnessed New Yorkers in wheelchairs who have been forced into the street because of these vehicles parked on the sidewalk. NYPD comes to city council and they lie. They lie about placard abuse, they lie about their disciplinary process, they lie about bail reform, they lie about the New Yorkers who they shoot in the streets. They are not good faith participants in this process. They are not seriously trying to fix their culture. They said they would do nothing different about the protests earlier this summer when they beat us in the street. The NYPD operates outside of civilian control, and they are a lawless gang, and City Council would be wise to start treating them that way. It's illegal to have a license plate cover in the state of New York, but there's a lot of NYPD officers who have license plate covers on their cars. So if you're going to do these automated enforcement, it's still going to be inequitable. Fuck the fucking police. Cheers.
I'm Jeff Novich, and I strongly support Bill 2159. I am the creator of an app called Reported. It's a free app for New Yorkers to quickly submit complaints about cars illegally blocking bike lanes and crosswalks. And in 2019, over 900 New Yorkers, many of them on this call, filed over 18,000 submissions, all of them with photos that would qualify under this bill. Now, these complaints are then relayed to 311, and that's how Reported works. It's a passion project. It makes no money, and there's no business. You can guess what happened to each of these. I ran the numbers, looked at the SR numbers, and virtually none of these complaints sent to the NYPD yielded a summons, literally like 10 out of 18,000. In addition, NYPD responded on average 3 hours after a submission was made, making it nearly impossible to catch these drivers. But I live in Harlem, and before COVID, I regularly commuted to Chelsea by city bike. My wife bikes our 2 children, soon to be 3, on a Dutch cargo bike. We have routinely had to deal with drivers blocking bike lanes, something made more dangerous when you have children with you.
My name is Ryan Frank. I'm a resident of the Upper West Side and I work in Sunset Park. I'm testifying today in support of Councilmember Levin's legislation.
I'm completely in support of this law. I will say remove the limitation from school and apply everywhere and not only to certain areas. The fine should be increased at least to $250.
I would like to thank everyone, the advocate, the administration for being part of this hearing. This hearing is adjourned.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Rose, and I'm the chair of the New York City Council's Committee on Youth Services. Today, the Committee on Youth Services is conducting an oversight hearing on the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development Summer Youth Employment Program. The committee will also hear resolution number 1388-2020, sponsored by Councilmember Barron. These bills would extend the 2020 recovery rebates of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act to qualifying children over the age of 16. Even before the COVID outbreak, the Summer Youth Employment Program has been an important connection for thousands of young New Yorkers. The Summer Youth Employment Program is also so valuable and so important to so many New Yorkers that the goal should be not only full restoration of the program to its pre-COVID size, but the expansion of the program.
I'm Daphne Montanez, Assistant Commissioner for Workforce Development at the Department of Youth and Community Development.
Last year, as we all know, after the mayor announced plans to totally eliminate SYEP, did you continue to contingency plan?
We began starting to plan around an alternate program that would be virtual.
When did the application period begin for students for children who wanted to be a part of the Summer Youth Program, Summer Bridges?
The application was launched on July 9th and it was open until July 15th.
How many applications did you receive?
We received 137,000 applications.
And how many spots were finally filled?
35,198.
What percentage is that?
25%.
I heard that you see the problem, that working in advance is going to be helpful. Will we see SYEP in this preliminary budget fully funded at the levels that we need?
There are no reductions currently in the FY22 SYEP budget, and the budget currently stands at $132 million. In terms of the final budget, that will all depend on a number of factors, including what the final program model will look like.
My name is Jorge Morales. I'm a junior at the University of Rochester, and I'm also a Teens Take Charge alum, a mentor, and was one of the leaders of Teens Take Charge Save SYEP campaign last year. The youth went out of their way this past summer to plead for these opportunities, and they were served with 35,000 slots. I think that's something that is completely unfair and honestly just really disheartening. We need to make sure that those communities that were most affected by COVID-19 are served and are given what they deserve.
I'm Carmen Lopez Villamel. I'm a senior at Beacon and a member of Teens Take Charge. I worked on the SYEP campaign last year. And last summer, 137,087 young New Yorkers, that's over 137,000 of your constituents, applied for SYEP Summer Bridge, and only 35,198 got a spot. So that leaves over 100,000 of your constituents without jobs and without support last summer. This year, we will not settle for anything less than guaranteed placement. Every young person who applies must get a job. And it also means that we need a budget that ensures that every young person who applies for SYEP will get a job.
My name is Mohammed Dean. I'm a junior at Hunter College. I appreciate the opportunity for this, but we need more than just 3 minutes. We need youth to be stakeholders, and with everything that's happened with coronavirus, we cannot afford to just have certain kids get the opportunities and certain students not.
A few of you mentioned you want to be a part of the decision-making process. Give us some idea of what that looks like.
That basically starts with meeting with us. It starts with accepting to meet with us. We reached out to multiple of your offices, and many of them we didn't get to schedule a meeting. So that's a huge barrier. If you all can't listen to us, sometimes when we talk to your reps, that's amazing as well. But the message gets swirled around. It's not directly as to we're speaking with you, right? The youth has to know that you're prioritizing their voices. So you have to meet with them.
I'm Miriam Chowdhury. I'm a sophomore at the Young Women's Leadership School of the Bronx and a Teens Take Charge organizer. I have been turned down for jobs because I lacked experience, and SYEP could have helped me with that. SYEP is employment based off of lottery, which I believe is unfair. Everyone deserves a spot.
Thank you all for participating. And with that, this hearing is concluded.
I am Council Member Alika Ampry Samuel, and I chair the Committee on Public Housing. Today's oversight hearing is on NYCHA Development, NYCHA 2.0, and the PACT-RAD program. I clearly understand that RAD-PACT is included in NYCHA 2.0. This is not redundant, but simply to highlight that the bulk of discussion today will be around RAD-PACT conversions. After all, that is the majority of the concern coming from my residents. 2 years ago, the NYCHA and the mayor announced the launch of a new development plan, NYCHA 2.0, which was a revamp of its original 2015 plan, Next Gen. A major component of the plan, PACT-RAD, involves converting 62,000 Section 9 units to Section 8 unit-based vouchers, with the goal of raising much needed capital to repair and renovate NYCHA's distressed properties. It's a good goal, and we all agree that something needs to be done to fix NYCHA's crumbling infrastructure. But this committee is also here to make sure that goal is being met in a way that puts the rights of NYCHA residents first.
Is there a requirement that they replace the boilers?
There is at least a year-long process where we're going in and doing a full inspection of all of the elements, the components, the systems of each of these buildings. And if the equipment, whatever it is, boilers or otherwise, need to be replaced, they absolutely will be replaced.
And then what does NYCHA say is their responsibility because there's a recent case where NYCHA saying, listen, we're no longer responsible because of the RAD-PACT agreement. The new developer has to take all of that. There's a case. Can you talk briefly to that?
Well, I don't know the specific case that you're referring to,
Okay.
but the point is, what I would say is, if residents are unhappy with the type of service or response they're getting from the PACT partners, they can certainly reach out to NYCHA. We want to ensure that the developers are doing what they need to do to make the repairs and provide service to each of the residents and each household.
I've been in NYCHA apartments
that look like something out of a magazine. And some of those same people believe that the grounds around their building doesn't matter to them. But when people look at those grounds and they say, look at those animals and how they live, they see an image that reflects us.
My name is Hector Vasquez. I am a resident, longtime resident of Fulton Houses, and I've lived in NYCHA residences for over 25 years, and I'm a disabled veteran, and I've been raising my two children in housing who were born in housing. And what you're going to hear today, and you're going to hear a lot of naysayers that are against it, and I get it. There's a lot of fear in the community about it, a lot of uncertainty, but we've put so many protections in place that I really feel good and confident that this is a good plan moving forward, as long as these protections that the work group put together.
I'm a resident of Fulton Houses. I'm also a member of the working group. There's a lot of issues that need to be addressed. NYCHA is like, it had a cancer that everybody ignored. So now the cancer has spread throughout NYCHA. And the ones who always pay the consequences are the residents. We're the ones living in horrid conditions. We're the ones being told that we have to take this rad pact. When you offer us new roofs, new boilers, new elevators, new bathrooms, new kitchens, of course we want that. Of course it sounds good. But what price are we paying for it? What rights as residents are we giving up?
My name is Miguel Acevedo. I'm the Tenant Association President at Robert Fulton Houses. I feel that NYCHA has worked wholeheartedly. The city has worked wholeheartedly. Every single elected official that represents our district has taken part from day one to make sure that this working group was resident driven.
I'm John Forster. I'm a former vice president with District Council 37. In terms of the RAD program, I mean, we're using public funds here to develop and restore, private funds to develop and restore public housing. That's not a good thing from the start. And we believe that this can and will, in fact, lead to the privatization of public housing.
With that being said, again, I thank you.
Good morning. I'm Councilmember Inez Barron, Chair of the committee. Thank you for joining the Committee on Higher Education on Housing Insecurity among students at the City University of New York. Housing insecurity is an umbrella term that includes a broad set of housing challenges people may experience, from affordability, safety, and quality to its ultimate expression, homelessness. Even prior to the pandemic, housing insecurity among CUNY students was a known problem. As the city has also suffered record homelessness and job loss as a result of the pandemic, we need to understand what is going on with housing insecure CUNY students in particular, and how the city can better serve them as they work towards earning a degree and making a better life for themselves and their families.
My name is Denise Maybank, and I am honored to serve as the Interim Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management for the City University of New York. I am, and we are, committed to our students not merely surviving, but to their thriving through the CUNY experience.
In the spring 2020 Education Trust Report entitled Coronavirus and Educational Equity, Supporting College Students Through the Pandemic, 56% of low-income students reported skipping a meal or reducing their daily meal amounts, and only 32% of poor students indicated that they would be able to afford these basic expenses, including food. CUNY continues to support students who need housing assistance by providing HRA application assistance, emergency grants, hotel rooms, and direct links to housing rights, such as New York City HRA Civil Justice, Housing Court, and the Tenant Prevention Task Force.
So students self-identify. How do they self-identify? Do they?
Some students may indicate that to their institution. but others may indicate it in providing shelter addresses as a part of the information that they give, or some temporary relationship. And so we're mining what we know about our students from our CUNY First perspective to figure out what we then can determine.
And how many laptops or tablets has CUNY distributed to students during the pandemic? Do we know if the students who have received these devices have internet access? Because we are certainly finding out that that's a major problem.
CUNY distributed more than 33,000 iPads and Chromebooks to students. We also procured 4,000 mobile broadband hotspots to support students who had unreliable or no internet access at home.
Students do not like going to multiple offices seeking services, because this is why they hide in the shadows, because they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be embarrassed. And just to highlight another point, when a student is homeless, what happens is they begin to distance themselves from student activities and their peers until you don't see them anymore.
My name is Melanie Cruvelis, and I'm Senior Manager of Policy and Advocacy at Young Invincibles. COVID-19, of course, has made the college student homelessness crisis even more dire. An April 2020 survey from the Healthy CUNY found that nearly half of CUNY students are worried about losing their housing during the pandemic. The researchers also found that housing insecurity is strongly associated with anxiety and depression, with serious impacts on students' ability to persist and graduate from college.
My name is Saeed Ghulam. I serve in the CUNY University Student Senate. I'm the graduate delegate from John Day College. Many of our CUNY students are still facing financial constraints to pay their housing expenses due to their loss of employment. Students still need financial support for their housing expenses in 2021. I urge the City Council to lobby the mayor to provide $34 million to CUNY so students can receive up to $1,000 of grant to support their housing expenses for the spring 2021 semester.
My name is Sarah Ortiz, and I'm a second-year student finishing my master's degree in International Migration Studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Basically, our landlord's response was to nail ply boards onto the front of our building, essentially trapping these pigeons inside. There have been patterns of asthma in my building. There has been a death in my building. So basically, we owe $30,000 in back rent and legal fees, and this corporate slumlord is suing us for non-payment of rent and ultimately the threat of eviction, despite being in violation of the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act warranty of habitability.
Thank you so much. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.